thing's off. All right. And you can see what happens there, Larry. You can see right there what happens when you find a stranger in the Alps in the world of Grim Dawn. So I have just completed my first playthrough of Fangs of Asterkarn, and I wanted to do a review of it. So this will contain spoilers. If you're not into that, stop listening now. And I'll preface this by saying I'm a huge fan of the base game of Grim Dawn, so that's going to color this a little bit. TLDR for this review, it is, or TLDW, whatever it is these days, this game is more Grim Dawn, and that is a great thing. So a couple other asterisks before getting into details here. A lot of people probably are looking into this expansion for the Ascendant mode content. I am not one of those people. I have never been a fan of like the other endgame modes, be it Shattered Realm or Crucible, and literally an endgame mode that is just, bigger coefficients in front of monster health and damage. It's just not for me. I'm more into playing quirky, weird builds at this point than optimizing and min-maxing everything. If you're into it, great, but I haven't even played that through yet to give any feedback on that or the new Ascendant features. And secondly, this review is based on a playthrough at Elite difficulty, not even Ultimate. And that's because I was playing it with a character that I have a ton of hours into. I didn't know what sort of choices were going to be in this because this was a blind playthrough. At least my first playthrough here was. So I didn't want to mess up any faction decisions or anything like that and lock myself into a bad decision on Ultimate mode on a character that I had spent a ton of time on, even though it's like a weird, suboptimal, crappy build. So yeah, this is based on playing the game on Elite difficulty, relaxed playthrough, enjoying the lore, enjoying the scenery, enjoying the world, more so than looking for a challenge. All right, in the usual way that I go about these sorts of reviews here is I usually start with some critiques, things that I think could use a little bit of improvement before moving on to what I do like about them. And I'm going to kind of stick that little format here. And the first critique is starting off in Fangs of Asterkarn, the pre-Kernhold content is a little disappointingly empty. At least it seems that way on the lower difficulties. Maybe some things get added on in Ultimate, and maybe they're going to do some post-launch Dangerous Domain editions later on. That's something they've done a lot historically, and maybe those will be branching off those early areas. But they just seemed devoid of quests or points of interest, at least relative to the base game. It was a long road through the wilderness with enemies to fight, but if you compare that to the base game of Grim Dawn, when you step outside of Devil's Crossing, there are just tons of little quests, tons of little caves to go into, lots to explore. It feels dense. Fangs of Asterkarn, the early areas, seem focused on adding acreage for the sake of adding acreage. I'd like it a little more packed than that. So that's kind of first thing that's a little bit of criticism. That does improve as the game goes along, though. As you get to Kernhold and beyond, there is a lot more density of points of interest and stuff like that. But that first taste out of my mouth, I was a little bit like, a little bit like, did they just focus on adding area? And along those same lines, for the amount of area that was added to this game, it seemed like the amount of new monster models was lower than I had hoped for. Getting a lot of mileage out of those boars and rocks that they added to the game here. And some of the models were really good. I mean, I did like the Birdmen, the Shaka people or whatever. They remind me of Skeksis from the Dark Crystal. I loved their models, particularly the ones that have like jars on the back. Those were really cool looking. But for the amount of size added to the game, the amount of new enemy types seemed a little bit disappointingly small, at least compared to what we've seen in previous expansions to Grim Dawn. And for an expansion that has a lot of quality of life features added to it, there were a couple of things where they were just kind of odd choices. The Noctutari faction, I'm probably messing up the consonants there. I don't speak bird. That was the fact that those quests for building up reputation acted like a bounty table but you couldn't say no and get the next bounty. It just wasn't a nice quality of life feel. Like I did a little bit of instant scumming there where it's like, I don't want to run through Port Valbury for the 17th time. Probably more than 17 times actually. So like I'd say no, restart an instance, have to run all the way back to him to get another quest that was like something else. Do a quality of life upgrade there. It's essentially a bounty table. Make them act like a bounty table where you can say no and get another option at least a few times per instance, especially when that is a good source. Well, it's one of the only sources you can get for building faction reputation, and it's a pretty good source of Ashes of Awakening when you're starting out. That could use a quality of life upgrade there to say no and get another bounty rather than forcing the player to just waste time and run back and get a quest that they want to do. Then on the feature side, I know they didn't say they were doing anything new with Devotion. I was kind of hoping that they would. I'm not necessarily looking for a lot of new proc-based devotions or things like that. A few would have been nice. You know, there's lots of those little cast-string creatures. We could use a beaver devotion in there. And I think there are some opportunities where maybe with future patches or something like that, they could do something with that system. There are a lot of new shrines for getting new devotion points. You can now, I think, get all of your 55 devotion points unlocked in normal difficulty with the new content. Once you get all those, make those shrines do something cool. That might be an easy kind of low-hanging fruit. You know, make them act closer to a totem, some sort of special totem rather than anything else when you use them and you have all 55 points. Maybe you can use those extra devotion points to level up devotions more quickly, something like that. In a perfect world, I'd like to see them address some of the, you know, my biggest pain point with devotion is the fact for a lot of builds, a lot of the resistance reduction constellations seem required for some builds. I don't know what the fix for that is, but that's probably my biggest complaint with the devotion system as it stands. I would like to see a creative solution to that come out of there. But, you know, even just doing something with these superfluous number of shrines to make it so that they have a benefit now that you can so easily get over that 55 points. That would be like a nice, like, there's a reason to go out and find these things and explore the world and get those shrines. Like, do something nice with those. It's getting a little bit, not stale's not the right word, but, you know, add a new bell and whistle there too. And then probably my biggest criticism of Fangs of Asterkarn is that it seems so far removed from the actual Grim Dawn. You know, this has kind of been like a progression over the last two expansions. You know, Ashes of Malmeth, even though the content wasn't my favorite, felt a little too close to Port Valbury, running through Malmeth for me, it felt very tied into the events of the Grim Dawn. That became a little less so in Forgotten Gods, which, you know, it had the witch god connection to the rest of the world and the interaction with the Kaimon's chosen faction throughout the plot, tying it back into that greater set of events that's happening in the main world. But then that was reduced even further here. Outside of like a couple references from, you know, the Skeksis guy calling it the Glorious Dawn, and a couple of quests that sent you back into the main game, which I did like that they had those quests that sent you back there. It almost felt like it could have been a separate game in a separate world, and it would have like, there would have been very little difference. There's very little connection to the rest of the world of Cairn here. I mean, the mood is right, the style of the lore notes is right, but it doesn't feel like there is a connection to the greater events going on in the rest of the world. And that's just kind of a subjective feel thing, right? It's not quantifiably bad or anything, but I wish it would have tied in more to that overall set of, you know, the Grim Dawn apocalypse. You go to Kernhold, and Kernhold looks like it's thriving, right? And, you know, maybe that's meant to be some sort of commentary on how badass the Kern are. But, you know, we're used to like having these like rubble cities where we're scrapping out of like, you know, the ashes of the apocalypse. And it's like, you go say, it's like, oh, damn, these barbarians are doing pretty good here. They're looking pretty fancy. That feel and that connection to the greater set of events in the base game was missing. And it would have been nice if that was kind of connected a little bit better. So those are the criticisms out of the way. So what did I like about Fangs of Asterkarn? The feature I was looking forward to most in Fangs of Asterkarn was the new inventor stuff to allow the re-rolling of affixes on gear. Re-rolling the base item, re-rolling the prefix, and re-rolling the suffix on, well, essentially any sort of farmed item. And I feel like there are different categories of Grim Dawn players. There are the players who build around a lot of legendaries, players who build around sets and stuff like that. And then you have players like me who build around monster and frequent items. For this feature was added for players like me. So Ascendant mode was added for a different type of player than me. This feature was for me. This was put in here for me, and I love it. It is exactly as advertised. You know, you would spend hours farming a boss, looking to get this perfect double rare item, only to get like a double rare where one of the rare affixes was good and the other one was absolute trash. And now you can fix it. Ah, amazing. And this is one of those things that I feel comes out of a game that is not based off of microtransactions. They can put these player-friendly features in because they are not counting on you to dump continuous hours into the game and have this like sunk cost fallacy built in your head to encourage you to spend money. They can be player-friendly and say, okay, we're going to put in this feature that means this game can take less of your time. I love that. It's a very player-friendly thing. It lets me... It's not quite deterministic to guarantee that you will get to the exact set of gear that you want, but it's a big step in that direction, and I absolutely love it. The aesthetics of the new environments, I would say, also felt good. Like, the biomes that were added felt different than what was in the base game. I made that comment earlier about Ashes of Malmouth, where the city of Malmouth really just felt like a bigger version of Port Valbury, which was not my favorite area in the game. A lot of the areas here, they feel new. Going through the wilderness, through the snowy cliffs, the ice caves, things like that. The environments feel new. They feel like a new sort of destination to go through. And even things like the chthonic rifts that were added here in prior expansions. A lot of the chthonic rifts that were added, they really felt the same as the chthonic rifts in the base game. So here they've changed that up a little bit, where you've gone from the obsidian shardy type of chthonic rift to more of a tentacly sort of chthonic rift. Even like a subtle change like that, it's good. It feels new. It's a fresh coat of paint. It's nice. And then when you made it to the latter half of those new environments, there was a good amount of optional side content and caves that were added, with lots of farmable bosses, massive array of, it feels like, of new monster and frequent items to pour through and see if you can find any kind of cool build-defining things there. I'm someone who likes exploring all the little nooks and crannies, finding the hidden areas that go off the edges of the map. By the way, putting the potion upgrades off the edge of the map, kind of a dick move, but, felt rewarding for someone like me that, goes and pokes at all those corners to be able to find that. But yeah, there was a great variety when you got to that latter half of caves that were just there for the sole purpose of having a farmable boss in them. Love that move. Felt really good. And there's definitely going to be like cases where I'm going to go back, look at all those and be like, I'm going to use that electrified spear from that Titan boss for something, or I'm going to use Sif's ring for something. And yeah, really like the side areas that they added there. In addition to that, there were a lot of feel-related things on quests that felt new and felt like things that they hadn't really tried out in the base game. An example of that, there's like this quest to find like this hippogriff off in the woods. And it literally involves tracking in the game to look for these little purple feathers in the background, where you have to like notice small background features to be able to find this trail that leads off the edge of the map. And if you're doing that in like I was in a blind playthrough, it like takes you a second to realize, oh, they're actually wanting me to do something they didn't have you do in the base game. That felt new. Similarly, there was like little puzzles, and I think there was like these 4 bonfires or torches you had to light, and you had to read lore notes to figure out how to solve that. they rewarded you for not just picking up the lore, but for reading it, which I was doing in this playthrough because I wanted to experience all that in this new content. That felt like, okay, Grim Dawn still has some new things they can do in this kind of engine here, and that was great. And speaking of lore, as you'd expect from Crate, the lore was great. When it comes to this style of lore telling where you're getting lore through items and notes, I actually, if you compare this to a game like a Souls-like game like Elden Ring or something like that, where they have like one sentence of lore on 50,000 items they're expected to piece together, I much prefer the style that Crate uses in Grim Dawn, where you get like, well, it's not just Crate, even like Elder Scrolls games, where you get like lore in books and notes, and it's putting together a whole big story instead of just piecing these cryptic sentences together. I've always liked that style, and there's a lot more of that that's extremely well done here in Fangs of Asterkarn. And like the one that's sticking on my head is there's like this scholar who's exploring with his assistant, and his assistant is unfortunately named Buxley, and as soon as you hear his name is Buxley, you're like, he gonna die. And I was like, I was rooting for Buxley to just, become a total like boss and just save the day and all that. But no, the beaver people like chopped off his legs as stumps and set him up posed like a little animal. Really, the grim part of Grim Dawn is still in the lore here, and it's really good and really well done. And as someone who is generally fairly drunk playing these games late at night, I appreciated like the drinking lore and drinking songs that were added in the Kern area. I can't drink hops. I'm allergic. I became allergic to hops like 2 years ago. It's absolutely terrible. So like having all these mead drinking things when like I occasionally drink mead now. It's a thing like that. It told you a story about the culture of the people in that area just to have drunken songs lying around on notes. And it's one of those things that kind of makes Grim Dawn my favorite of these like isometric ARPGs rather than like the relatively devoid of lore worlds of like Diablo and other games. And the choice of end boss was a good choice, and that it was someone who you had references to throughout the base game of Grim Dawn. This was like one of the cases where there was a little bit of that tied back, where Baranath had been mentioned for a long, long time in variety of different items. I think there was like Baranath's Gaze and a couple other things that mentioned the Great Beast. So kind of a cool choice of end boss there. I'm going to reserve any sort of review on the difficulty of the boss because I played it on Elite. It is kind of a common theme through Grim Dawn in its expansions that the bosses are a little too easy. Loghorian, Theoden Marcel, Korvac, all extremely easy. Baranath seems like he's in that mold as well, but I did play it on Elite on a kind of over-leveled for Elite character. But the design was cool. The setting of the fight was nice. Blowing the horn to summon him down. There was this nice foreshadowing where you see him flying up the cliff when you go over there. That kind of end sequence was well done. And then if you want that challenge, that optional challenge, Mogdragon's right there waiting for you, and even on Elite, he was a thing. He was harder than the ultimate version of Mogdragon from the base game, the Elite version of Mogdragon that was waiting up there on the cliffs. He gave me a time, and that's kind of saying something, considering that he is the super boss that's just standing out there in the open, let alone the hidden super bosses. So the challenge is there for the players who want to go looking for it. That's not me, but if you're looking for it, you can find it and have those challenges to pile your corpses up against. But yeah, for something that is less than $20, Fangs of Asterkarn is great. Definitely a lot more good there than bad. A lot of the bad is kind of nitpicky. But like I said in the opening moments of this, it is more Grim Dawn, and that is a great thing. If you're a fan of Grim Dawn, go out and buy Fangs of Asterkarn. If you've never played Grim Dawn, but you are generally a fan of isometric ARPGs, this might be a good moment for you to get in and try it, because the world is huge and massive and full of a lot of kind of interesting mechanics that, they've given me thousands of hours worth of enjoyment. Thanks for listening.